Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel Simplifying Literature. Today we are diving into a really interesting chapter of English literature, the Middle English period, which lasted roughly around 1066 to 1350 AD. So, in this class, we are going to look at a quick introduction to the period, some major historical features, a timeline of important happenings, the kind of literature people were writing, and finally, some famous literary works from this time. So, let's get started. So, the Middle English period officially started in 1066, and that's the year of the Norman conquest. The Normans came from France and they took over England. Yes, they took over England, and along with their rule, they brought a whole new culture, legal system, and most importantly, the language. That is the Norman French. So, earlier, people spoke Old English language, which does not sound anything like the English we speak today. But after 1066, after the Norman conquest, the language started mixing with French and Latin words. All right. The language started to mix itself with French and Latin words, and eventually, this mix became what we now call as the Middle English language. And one of the most famous authors who wrote in Middle English was Geoffrey Chaucer, who was also the writer of the Canterbury Tales. Now, I have made two separate videos on Geoffrey Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales. I will be linking the links of those videos in my description box. You can get access to them through there. So let's continue. But this time period wasn't just a time of language change. Life was actually pretty rough. So one major disaster was the Black Death, a deadly disease, a terrible one actually, that killed millions of people in Europe, including many in England. Life was very hard during this time because of sickness, war, and poverty. Then there was the Hundred Years' War, which was a super long conflict between England and France. It lasted more than 100 years, and this war affected everyone from kings to the farmers. Everyone in the society was affected by this war. Also, the social structure back then followed the feudal system. This meant the king gave land to the nobles, and the nobles had peasants working on it in exchange for food and services. And most common people were poor and they worked really, really hard to survive, while the rich people they lived comfortably. So this period was full of changes politically, socially, and culturally. It was a big period, it was a big time of change in language, culture, and society. And it laid the foundation for the modern English we speak today and gave rise to some of the first major works in English literature. So now let's quickly walk through some major events from this era. In 1154, Henry II becomes king. He is the first ruler from the Plantagenet dynasty, which ruled England for many years. Then in 1170, a shocking incident happened. Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, is murdered inside Canterbury Cathedral by a group of four knights. Now, Archbishop of Canterbury was the highest religious leader in England. In 1189, Richard I, also known as Richard the Lionheart, becomes king and he leads the Third Crusade. It symbolizes his bravery. In 1199, Richard the Lionheart dies, and his brother, King John, takes over. He becomes the new king. He wasn't the popular ruler, but he taxed people a lot. So he was not liked, he was disliked by everyone. Then in 1215, King John is forced to sign the Magna Carta. He was forced by the angry nobles to do so. This document limited the power of the kings, which was super important for the development of democracy. In 1236, the Mongols invaded parts of Russia and Eastern Europe. They were fierce warriors from Asia and had already conquered large areas in Asia. In 1274, Thomas Aquinas, who was a great theologian, died. He was a major Christian thinker and he wrote books about religion, philosophy, and logic. In 1337, the Hundred Years' War officially began. It, the war began between England and France, known as the Hundred Years' War, and it started because the King of England claimed they had a right to rule France. In 1347, the Black Death hits Europe. It spread from Asia across trade routes carried by fleas on rats. It was deadly and wiped out around one third, I mean, millions of people, one third of the population. That's huge. Entire villages were abandoned and nothing was ever the same again. So now let's move forward and talk about literature. During this period, stories began exploring chivalry, which meant bravery, honor, loyalty, and respect for women. These were the qualities that were expected from a knight. Religion also played a big role, so many literary works had religious themes heaven, hell, sin, and so on. Writers also produced ideological and spiritual texts. One major change was the shift from Latin to vernacular languages, that is, the local spoken languages like Middle English, Old French, and German. The, Now, this shift was important because so that the people could actually understand what was written. So, literature became more accessible to ordinary folks, not just scholars and priests. Everyone could read now. So, as English continued to evolve, it started blending Old English with Norman French. Old English and Norman French were combined, especially in England. That gave us a richer vocabulary and new styles, and which also helped in shaping the modern English we speak today. A major literary work from this time period was the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. It was written in Italian language. It is a long poem about a journey through hell, that is Inferno, purgatory, and heaven. It uses powerful literary techniques like personification, allegory, and symbolism. This period also gave rise to religious drama, mystery plays, and morality plays that is used to teach people about the Bible. So now let's talk about some famous works from this time. The first one is Chansons de Geste. Now these are heroic poems written in old French language. They tell exciting stories about kings like Charlemagne and his knights. They dwelled on topics that was on the topics that were basically about the life and adventures of Charlemagne, who was the powerful king of the France. Then comes the chronicles. They were basically historical records or historical writings that had stories of wars, kings, and major events, royal successions, and other happenings in a kingdom as well. They were passed down from generation to generation, and that's how we remember them today. Then comes a very important work, the summary of which I expect all of you to read thoroughly and by heart. That is the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It's a magical poem written in alliterative verse where many of the words in a line begin with the same sound. It's about Sir Gawain who accepts a strange challenge from a green skinned knight, and the poem has about 25-30 lines. Then comes Brute by Layamon. Layamon is basically a monk. Alright, Layamon is a monk. It is one of the first long poems written in Middle English around 12th century. It tells the history of Britain, including legends like King Arthur, and it is over 16,000 lines long. Then comes another work, Pearl. It is a touching dream vision poem. The narrator dreams of his daughter who is lost, and he refers to his daughter as Pearl. Pearl is basically a reference to his daughter, and they talk about grief, faith, and the afterlife. The poem is deeply emotional and beautifully written. The daughter is now in heaven, and they have a thoughtful and spiritual conversation. The poem deals with the pain of losing a loved one, but also gives comfort by showing a vision of peace and eternal life. Then comes The Owl and the Nightingale. It is a fun and early debate poem. The owl represents wisdom and seriousness, and the nightingale stands for beauty and joy. They argue over whose values are better. Then Cursa Mundi, which means runner of the world. It's a long religious poem which basically spreads the teachings of Jesus Christ. It retells the stories of the Bible to teach Christian values to common people. Then comes the last work, that is Patience, based on the story of Bible, that is the story of Jonah from the Bible. He tries to avoid God's mission. Now, what actually Jonah does here is he is chosen by God to deliver a message to a sinful city. And he tries to run away from God's command and ends up being swallowed by a giant fish that is basically a whale. And he spends 3 days inside that whale. And the poem talks about the importance of being patient and obedient even when things are difficult. There's a good model for you to follow from here. All right. So, students, let's sum it all up. The Middle English period, yes, the Middle English period was shaped by big historical events like the Norman Conquest, the Hundred Years' War, and the Black Death. The language evolved, blending Old English with French and Latin. Literature reflected themes of chivalry, religion, and moral values. And we got some amazing literary works that laid the foundation for English literature as we know it today. So, everyone, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more literary lessons. See you in the next one.